I think most of us have a favorite Christmas show or play or book, a Christmas story. It might be A Christmas Carol, the classic, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, Elf, I hear is good. I've actually never seen Elf. I know. But I'm going to tell you, I've said before, for those who know, visitors I realize as well are here, I'm a big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So this Christmas, I want to begin with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is actually a Christmas story, although people probably don't think about it that way. But it is. So for those of you who have not read it, like I haven't seen Elf, maybe some of you have not read that book. But the story is set in an imaginary world, Narnia. And the story begins with the land of Narnia lying under the power of the devil. So this will be an analogy. This is a new world that still uses the Christian symbols and story and reality. So the story begins, Narnia is lying under the power of the devil, like Earth after the fall of Adam and Eve. But in this world, the devil is this snow queen. And its power of sin is symbolized by the covering of ice and snow that's been gripping this land of Narnia for more than a century. It's been forever. Nobody's remembered when it wasn't there. And one of the characters sums up this fallen world by saying that in Narnia, it's always winter but never Christmas. So again, Christmas is symbolized in Narnia by this coldness. And Christmas, well, the sin is the coldness, but Christmas is seen as this great fall of the snow. And again, the idea that warmth comes back into the world. So as the story begins, there's this rumor spreading throughout the land that Aslan, the great Christ figure in Narnia, has returned in hiding somewhere. So think here of Israel's prophecy of the Messiah coming, the hidden nature of the babe in Bethlehem. So again, he's in the world, but he's not clearly presented himself yet. That's where the story begins. And his mere presence, though, starts the snow melting, and the ice of the river starts to break up, and green shoots spring forth, buds blossom. That's Christmas in Narnia. Now, I mentioned that. The Narnia story as a Christmas story on this Christmas Eve, because I've mentioned, if you were there for this past weekend's masses, that Lewis and Tolkien stressed the power of fairy tales to tell the deepest truth about our lives and God. Now, most of us, at least after childhood, we think of fairy tales as make-believe as opposed to the real world, where bills are paid, kids are taken to school, you have to hold down a job. That's real. Fairy tales, that's just it's made up. Tolkien and Lewis had a perspective that actually turned that around, upside down. So fairy tales, they say, are the human attempt to be in touch with a deeper truth in the so-called real world. And they explain deep truths about our own story and God's story that we have a hard time putting into words or articulating. But the feelings and the flow and the symbols of fairy tales actually present us with a chance to say things that are true that other language cannot handle or we can't grasp very well. So we've come to this church today, drawn by a beautiful story of a little child born in humble circumstances in the middle of the night amongst sheep and cattle, a donkey, rough shepherds, miraculously angels, and the story can move us to tears. And this is a true story. It really happened 2,000 years ago, let that be clear. So it's a fairy tale, but it's a true one. It's history. But while we've heard it 100 times probably, this story, that we may have a difficult time explaining what the story means for us. It's beautiful, and I feel that, but I can't really articulate that. And so today, what I'd like to do is just tell my own version of a fairy tale and bring those symbols into the Christmas story and try to cast light on the meaning of this true story of Christmas in doing that. So if I were going to, I think Lewis does a great job, and others have as well, all those Christmas stories you like, and somehow they're getting into this as well. They're talking theology to you, but you don't really use those terms. But it's touching your heart because it's real. So if I were going to use those kind of symbols and things in those languages of the fairy tale, I would say something like this. There was once a great king, the most powerful, wise, good king imaginable. And this king had an only begotten son, a beloved son. And this son would walk the kingdom of his father, but he had this magic cloak that would make him invisible. But the son would walk, and he would interact, and he would decide to secretly help the people of the kingdom. But what would happen is, during one of these travels, through his father's kingdom, he saw this girl, a beautiful young woman, living in abject poverty and misery. But to the prince's clear eyes, this young woman, beneath the grime in her condition, was very beautiful, very virtuous. And it was love at first sight for the prince. But the girl did not see the prince because, again, he was wearing his cloak. So the prince's love was so great that he desired to marry her and free her from her sad condition, to lift her up, to bring her to the palace. But he wanted her to love him freely, that her love could be freely given. And the prince was afraid that if he shed his cloak and revealed himself in his magnificence, the girl would be overwhelmed. And what if she decided and said yes to marrying him out of self-interest or fear? How would he know that she really, truly loved him for himself? And so the beloved son of the great king put aside that magic cloak, put aside the jeweled crown, disguised himself as a beggar to go and win the poor girl as his bride, coming empty-handed to her in order that she might know and receive him without fear and hopefully love him as he loved her. So, on Christmas, we celebrate the day when the Son of God put aside his power and disguised his divinity under the weakness of a helpless infant. He was born in poverty and obscurity, born in a manger in Bethlehem. He became one of us, someone we could see and touch. Why would he do that? Well, out of love he had for the humanity, for us, each one of us, for all of humanity, and for each one of us. We are each the object of Christ's love, the Prince. And we are often miserable, we're poor, we're just as covered in grime of our sin as the girl in the fairy tale. In fact, she is us. But that's not how God sees us. Why else would the Prince of Peace come from the Father to woo us, to woo each one of us, to you and me? That's what he did on Christmas night. So the Christmas story reminds us of a very important, the most important fact of all. The most important fact in our lives, that we are beautiful and loved, each one of us. And think of those shepherds. Shepherds are the first people to whom God tells the secret of his coming and the secret of the disguise, that you could pierce through the disguise. He takes off the mask a little bit. These are poor, rough people. They're not given to much religious practice, and yet they were the first to hear these angelic love songs that God sings to humanity. They feel the first thawing of hell. So we humans, we can be afraid sometimes and suspicious of God, of his judgment. He's the Lion of Judah. Aslan is the Lion of Judah. He can be fierce. But the prince's plan to disguise himself was very clever. No one can ever be afraid of a child in a baby in a manger. All can approach him with confidence, whether you are a shepherd or a wise man or king. So he shed his divine power on the first Christmas so that his bride might first see in him one of her own kind and fall in love with him before his glory was revealed to her and to us. So again, why do we love Christmas? Why do we love those stories? And the simple account of the birth of Jesus at Bethlehem. Because whether we can put it into words or not, and again, this is where fairy tales have the advantage. Whether we can put it into words or not, it's a story that we learn in the story we're each loved by God. That's why we cry Christmas stories. That's why we continue to go back to those stories. We want the story to be true. So the only question left is how each of our love stories is going to end. So when our prince holds out his hand to us, Will we refuse to take it, refuse to be lifted out of our poverty and sin by the love of God? Or will we accept his proposal that he offers us and live happily ever after with and for this poor beggar, this royal beggar, who from the manger pledges love, and he offers each one of us a throne?